What's going on, everybody, and welcome to episode 37. I am your host, Marcus, and in this episode, we're talking about what we get stuck on. Now, there's something I've been thinking about over the past couple weeks, really, that I've tried to put more thought behind. And, a lot of different times I talk about, making change, right? Discover Ignite is about making dramatic change in your life. And I try to help you and find ways to do that. And a lot of times we don't think we need change. A lot of times we know it's hard to change. It's hard for me to change myself. And I know it's hard for me to even convince you to change. But I came across a particular quote, which I really want to kind of get in and kind of follows the whole thought process of what this podcast is going to be about. And the quote goes, "We don't think ourselves into new ways of living. We live ourselves into new ways of thinking," by Richard Rohr. And being said, I talk about this all the time. I talk about going into living in experiences, and that a lot of times we can get hung up and stuck in books and movies and living someone else's life. Or perhaps we want to make a change, and so we look at self-development, self-improvement, personal development, whatever you want to call it. We look to these books to improve ourselves. And something I think I got stuck on for a long time too was I immersed myself in these books, right? And I talk about applying the things that you learn and how important that is, and taking action, and why I think a lot of people fail when they do self-development, because they get stuck on all these new thoughts and ideas and perspectives, but yet they don't actually make the change. And that's what I think this quote matches up perfectly, so you can read about it and think the thoughts and get the perspectives, but if you're not living experiences, you're not going to get motivated to want to do stuff. You're not going to want to have desire to want to go out and make an impactful change on your life. And then you find that you're still in the same spot that you've always been. And so when I say that, and I think about this quote, when I came across this quote, which is something I've never heard before, but it condenses essentially what I've talked about many different times in a broader scale, right? Giving you tools and everything like that to try to help you make the change. And when I talk about this, about living the experiences, and like even for myself, I've made great changes in my life. And a lot of them have come at different points in my life. Right? I talk about getting to points in your life where you will no longer tolerate some things to make dramatic change, whether you make the change or life makes the change for you. And a lot of times you are going to want to make the change because the change that life brings you isn't the change you're going to want. And a lot of times, even being said, the change that you want a particular way, it will have similarities to what you want, but it won't be exactly what you want. But you're trying to make change. There's ways to make it happen, and be okay with that. But you have to start experiencing stuff, right? Again, it goes back to the motivation. You aren't going to be motivated by a quote. You aren't going to be motivated by something that you perhaps see, right? A lot of times we have to almost experience it ourselves. And this is why we get so immersed in movies, and they may actually motivate us to an extent, or a book that may motivate us, somebody's story. This is why we fall in love with stories, because we relate to specific points, or perhaps turning points in that person's life that we relate to ourselves, and that motivates us to want to do it. But if we can't find it through our own lives, but a lot of times it ends there. We see these things and they motivate us to want to do something, but we don't actually do anything. We don't actually take an action to make our lives our own movies and realize that we're scripting our own lives as we see fit. Every day can be the change, the turning point in your life, that you make a change dramatically that can be for the better. And that's ultimately what I talk about when I have Discover Ignite, when I talk about these things, is to make dramatic change to the change that you want, right? We live a short experience and we all tend to forget that. And when you relate this quote in life experience, you're going to have a life experience that's going to change you. And that is what causes you to be motivated, what causes you to make greater change in your life. Or you can go out and experience something that I've talked about before. I don't know if I've talked about it on the podcast, but something I've had throughout my different social media outlets that I've talked about is that what you should do is sometimes you just need to go out and see what you're missing. And I think that's the biggest thing, is to find what you are missing, but you don't know what you're missing. And if you go out and experience stuff and get to a point where you say yes as opposed to no on certain things, and following your curiosity, and that's what, like, for me, my journey has kind of just been that way. Like, I've just been curious about stuff and how things work. And so I hear about something and I follow up with it, and how important that is, because it led me down to the next thing that helped me, make greater change in my life. Is if you even go back to when I was coming out of high school, I started college. I did a whole summer semester, and then I ended up going fully loaded in the fall with a full load of work full time. So it was just a lot of work. I got overwhelmed. I ended up dropping out of college to focus on work, picking up a second job. And I just work relentlessly, 80 hours a week. And I got to that point where I was telling myself, this isn't where I want to be. And so I had to make change. And, my story unfolds, and I've done many different things following intuition throughout there. I followed my intuition to Australia, and then I came back, and then I followed my intuition back to my father's, right? Things didn't work out when I came back to California. I was at a tough spot. I wasn't liking it. I was doing security work at the time. Nothing was just panning out the way I wanted it. But I couldn't read about it. I couldn't think my way to it. Yes, I believe in stuff like law of attraction and all that stuff, but it also requires you to take some sort of action. If there is no action associated with the thought process, it will not just drop out of thin air. I agree, and it's scientifically proven, right? We're all made of energy. Everything is made of energy, and things align the way you think. And it's your thought process, right? It's that vibration, essentially, on how you create your reality. But you also still have to have not only the mind focused on it, but your body needs to sync along with it. If your body does not, your body and mind, and something I talk about, and a pillar I have and I've talked about before, is your body and your mind have to be in sync when following these things, when following your destiny, following your purpose, when following specific things in your life. And so, being said, don't get caught up on details. Don't get caught up on not knowing enough. Don't get caught up on waiting for the perfect moment. None of these things happen. They just don't happen. And for me, I got to the point to where I would no longer tolerate being overweight, no longer tolerate working at a factory, no longer tolerate having a job where I was beating my body up every single day, or having, X, Y, and Z, whatever the case is. Everything has led me, and I've been curious to try to make change. How can I make this better? I don't like where I am. And I think that's the biggest thing, is realizing that I think what we all really truly seek is freedom of the mind, freedom to do what we want, right? Not just internally. We want the freedom internally, and that is extremely important. But we also need the freedom without, right? In our external world as well. And how important this is. But to be able to do that, you have to you come at it very differently. Your body and your mind have to be in sync. And if they are, things start to become the reality. And you have to realize that at some points where, the riverbank to riverbank, you're going to have to cross streams. You have to figure out a way to get across there. You're going to have to take leaps to get there, and it's going to be a struggle to get across to the other side. Any change is painful. That's the struggle. But you get to a point to where you become happy because you are in a state of self first. And something I've talked about and I regurgitate many different times, because self first is important. You can't put other people in front of you because you become resentful. Whatever the case is, at some point you normally become resentful. And it's something I try to preach about, not being positive or negative about particular situations, but being neutral. Not being all positive, not being all negative, not sitting neutral, but taking everything just as they are, just as it is. Maybe it's good, maybe it's bad, but it is what it is. And understanding that when I talk about the freedom of external, right? I've lived that. I try to build my way to that. You can't just drop everything, right? If you don't have responsibilities, it's a little bit easier, but you can build your way towards that. What can you do? What is holding you back? A lot of times we won't do specific things because we don't want to take on specific things, right? Like maybe you've built your way up to some, maybe you're a professor, right? Or maybe you're a doctor or something like that. And that is no longer what you want to do. You want to break away. You want to live a life where you're happy, you're not overworked, you don't want all these different things, right? You have to set yourself up, but to be able to do that, you have to be curious and you have to follow up. You have to see, well, what can I do? You have to realize there will be sacrifices, right, to cross the river. You'll have to sacrifice perhaps having the big, glorious house or the fancy car. And is that stuff really freedom? When we're talking about freedom in the external world, we're talking about being free of responsibility is what it is. Free to go out and do what we want, not be tied down or trying to live a life that somebody else is telling us to live, but to live the life that we want to live. And I understand a lot of times it can be hard if you got parents that want you to look at some way specific. And even for myself, growing up with my father, I talk about my father all the time about how him and I kind of butt heads on specific things. And I always just did my own thing. He would give me advice and then I would tell him what I was doing or show him what I was doing. And he wouldn't agree with it. But then in the end, he agreed. And he was proud of me because of that. And it's even for you have to go out and do it, right? If you need to cut that cord, do that. But you need to free yourself externally. And you need to figure out how to do it. I'm not saying just drop everything, sell everything, and then jump in a van. Maybe you could. If you had absolutely no responsibilities, do that. You have to know what you're sacrificing and be okay. You have to be okay with that. And then when I talk about being free internally, right, we all have demons. We all have issues of our past. And we question who we are, who we're trying to be, who we want to be. But ultimately, just find that objective side to it. Forgive yourself for whatever you've done. We're human. We make mistakes, and it won't be the last mistakes that you make. You have to be okay with that. Once you come to terms with this, you realize that it's not that big of a deal. And even when you hear about, you should use your time for the best. You should experience life for the best. A lot of times it's easier to hear that. It goes back to that quote about, yes, I hear it, but it's not motivating me to do it because you are missing out on the experience that shows you what you're missing. Because it's the knowledge, the unforeseen, the perspective that we're missing that will cause us to make bigger change, that will cause us to see things in a different light. And a lot of times, even for myself, I talk about that many different times, about how I've had a lot of different perspective changes. because it is important, right? A lot of these changes that I've had, some came on neglect, neglecting myself for diet, neglecting myself for specific things in my life, right? And some came just naturally from life and knowing what life brings. But being said, right, you want to ultimately find the freedom. You want to still be able to guide yourself and navigate through these roadblocks in your life and find the freedom that allows you to be free internally. Once you, again, come to terms with the fact that whatever happened in the past doesn't define who you are today, because you are writing your script daily on every minute of every day. But realize that, moving forward, there could be a lot of unknowns. And I've gotten to a place in my life where there is a lot of unknowns, but I'm okay with it. Because maybe one day I just won't wake up. And as morbid as that sounds, I think you have to get to a point to where you just don't care. You're at a point to where you put yourself first, you free your internal state, you free the external state, and then you live your life. But not to live it in a box, not live it how someone else defines it. So I think a lot of times we fall into that. And I think some people are okay living a certain way. There's nothing saying that's wrong with that, as long as that state that you're in is a state that you want to be in. That freedom, as long as you have that freedom internally, the freedom externally to do what you want, that's where you want to be. This provides your happiness, but you have to realize this state is something you have to maintain. You should always maintain your health, mentally and physically. That matters. It's the foundation on which everything stands, the foundation in which you are navigating life. You only get one flesh machine through your whole life. Take care of it, house it. All your inputs determine your outputs. And so if you free the internal state, if you free the external state, you can start making bigger strides in your life. And some people may see this differently. People may talk, people may judge. It doesn't matter what you do in life. People will always be there to do that. It's just freeing yourself from the external states and being okay with what they say, being okay with how they act towards you. Sometimes you lose friends, but you gain other friends that have a better viewpoint or a similar viewpoint that is of yours. And that's ultimately what matters, is the freedom. And so when you're looking for self-improvement, you're not looking for temporary motivation. I think we get stuck on temporary motivation. What can get me out of the rut that I am if I just read and watch documentaries and stuff, and this will get me out of where I am. It helps the mental state, the mindset. The mindset is ultimately, the internal state is what's going to start to get you in the right direction. Because you have to start talking about yourself in the right light. And it was one of the very first tools I brought to the toolbox when I started the challenge on my YouTube channel, was the way you talk to yourself, because it starts there. It starts from that internal state that is going to tell yourself, okay, well, I can do this, because you have another voice in there that tells you that you can't. And proof in a smattering of images of what you did wrong in there. And so you have to combat that. You have to free yourself from all that stuff. Say, hey, maybe that was yesterday, but right now, today, it's different. It's going to be different. I don't know what's coming. It's going to be okay. I will not always be prepared. I will not always be ready. But I'm okay. I'm free. I'm free from not having to worry, from expending the energy on worry and fear and all these other different things, because that is what's guiding your life, is the fear. You want freedom. I don't think we all want big houses and cars and all these other different things. Yes, they're nice to have, But ultimately, we seek freedom to do what we want. Internally, we'll want to be free of all those things, those thoughts and ideas that hold us down and make us think twice about who we are. And maybe we were bad people, and maybe we did something in our past that defines us. How does that define us for us going forward? People may bring it up and they may talk about it, and they may paint you in that picture. You have to realize that you've freed it. They can talk about all day because they have not freed themselves. They still live confined in themselves and not free in themselves. And when I talk about Discover Ignite, and when I talk about making dramatic changes in your life, is freeing that internal state and freeing your external state to a point where you become in a state that is almost blissful because you have the freedom. But you have to realize that it doesn't just stop there. It's a state that has to be maintained. And even for me over the past couple of weeks, I've been really thinking about, I've made a lot of changes, but now I'm starting to like confine myself again. And I always talk that you have to maintain that comfort zone. You have to maintain the external structures. You're allowed to go out beyond that. And to do that, you have to go out and do other things. And I haven't been experiencing a lot of new things. I've been doing small things here and there because I've been concentrating on the movement that I've made so far, and focusing on specific things, focusing on what to do next with Discover Ignite, focusing on what with my stock stuff, right? And that new avenue that I am going, and realizing that it's fun and I really enjoy it. And I love that I wake up and I get to do it every day, but ultimately understand that, there's still other things I should be doing. There's still other experiences I should be living, right? And they talk about a bucket list. I think you should have a bucket list. When's the last time you thought about, well, what are the things I really want to get done in my life? I started thinking about this the other day, and I was like, there's possibly something else I could be doing. Like, what else is there that I've really wanted to do? And when you talk about like getting to a point in your life where you're satisfied, like, do you really have a bucket list of like the things that you wanted to get done in your life? And how many times you've gone out and started doing those things? And I know even now, things are so constrictive with the whole pandemic and everything, but ultimately understand that shouldn't stop you. Like, we still have one life. This should put things more into perspective, to be honest, about what really matters, about keeping yourself healthy to be able to go out and do the things that you want, as opposed to, again, wiring yourself into somebody else's life, whether that's through a book, through a movie, through video games, through whatever, XYZ, fill in the blank. Not saying that those things are bad, right? You can 110% do those things, and I do those things, but it should be limited. Like, you should spend more time doing the things that you want and getting out and feeling, right? Like, feeling, I think we're losing that sense of the internal self and feeling and how we feel internally, because it's all wrapped in other things and different lives that aren't ours. Because it's easier to escape because it's almost immediate. You could watch a movie, read a book, and be immediately immersed in that person's life. You forget about your life, because in that moment, you're living somebody else's life. And you notice this a lot when you do this, and you're watching something, you're really into the movie or whatever the case is, and then someone will tell you something or something will happen, and you won't even notice it. You completely block them out because you're so immersed in the movie. Is that how you want to live? Or do you want to be so immersed? Imagine just being immersed like that in that moment in your own life, and living your life, enjoying your life so much that you're so immersed in your life that it's exciting to wake up and do what you're doing. What's the next thing I do? I don't know. Maybe I should just look something up, check something else out new. Maybe today I'll go start doing some kickboxing, or maybe today I'm gonna go do some rock climbing, or maybe today I'm gonna try a new hiking trail, or maybe today I'm just going to take a new route to work, or maybe today I'm going to ask that guy or girl out, or maybe today fill in the blank with your list of things that you want to do. Maybe it should be a list of just challenges that you've wanted to do. Maybe you wanted to go to a movie by yourself. Go to a movie by yourself. Maybe you wanted to try fencing. Go try fencing. Point being is reading about it, watching it, all these things, they're not giving you what you really want. It's a temporary satisfaction. And so you go and you live a life, you come and you're not happy with where you're at. But we're so quick to jump onto these things and plug into somebody else's life as opposed to our own. And feel, right, get the temporary satisfaction, even if you're trying and reading self-development books on living a life, right? Why don't you try living an experience that will change your life? And that, my friends, is what's going to get the change, the desire, all these things that you truly want, these things that you watch, read about, they become your life.